Damn, what is up, my internet friends? Welcome to Walking and Talking, the show in which I walk and talk. Good news for you. We're in this idyllic location, one of your faves, and it's pretty darn nice out. Also good news for you is that I feel generally pretty good and energetic, perhaps on account of positive dietary changes over the last few days. Another item of good news would be that roiling around in my brain are a lot of ideas about accessibility, particularly that of this YouTube channel, and how it might become more accessible in a way that's good for everybody. Another note of good news might be that there still exists some form of resistance towards a purely flattened empirical notion of utility. For example, often in my daily life, I might think to myself, perhaps upon listening to a podcast or upon watching someone else's YouTube channel, I'll think to myself, boy, there'd be so much potential if I could only make my videos more accessible in a number of ways. So for instance, I could talk about specific topics in a way that makes what I'm saying more indexable, if that's the right word, or is it indexical? Maybe it's indexable. That I could have a video that has a title that clues a potential viewer into what I'm going to be talking about, and it would be a recognizable topic that someone may or may not be interested in, and this would be helpful, I often think, in allowing the content to integrate more into the viewer's experience. So typically when I'm walking and talking, the general thrust is towards incoherence or discombobulation around topics that are generally philosophical in nature. And in my view, they don't quite exist as topics as such. It's as if topics are only really a method of conveyance for actual incoherence. Like the topic is just kind of the shell, and what's inside the shell is something that's more about the quality of the actual experience. What's at the core of it? What's beneath the experience, even? And so, a danger that I've maybe encountered when I have taken my own advice of attempting to speak in a more conventionally accessible way So for instance, trying to lay out a topic and then speak about it in a conventionally logical, utilitarian way is that there's a danger of a certain kind of flattening. That I have to continue to feel interested in it. I have to continue to feel an exciting potential of discovery in this act of talking. It seems like for this series of videos to continue to have anything compelling or unique about it. It seems to me at this instance, even though I spent a lot of time thinking about how great it could be, how much potential there is for a type of expansion of what I'm doing. And I mean expansion both personally for myself and for you, the viewer, and for other potential viewers. Potential to, I think to myself sometimes, make a greater impact in the world. Just by adding a layer to this that is more accessible. And that layer, you know, being more conventionally identifiable topics. Rather than always seeming to start out on very high levels of abstraction and insisting on such a self-reflexive mode of talking. You know, just talk about topical subjects, things that are happening in the world. It's not like I don't care about these things. I'm in fact really interested in things that are happening in the world. I'm interested in subjects. However, there's this question of, if I'm not an expert on these subjects, is it possible for me to contribute anything valuable around them other than merely being a popularizer? But also, isn't being a popularizer a useful thing? It does seem like a useful utilitarian thing for me to popularize subjects that I think could be beneficial if more people knew about them or heard about them or thought about them. And another thing around accessibility is like, if I did do this, if I made, for instance, shorter videos, or if I made clips of walking and talking that addressed more narrow scopes that could be pointed to with the title of the video, it seems like it would provide a better interface for the viewer to be able to access thought that interfaces with what they are currently thinking about, what's currently on their minds. And I think to myself, why don't I just do that? What's the problem? I don't think there is really one. As long as I can maintain interest myself in what I'm talking about. And ideally, even, these subjects could also serve as just kind of jumping off points for a more expansive type of thinking, a more comprehensive type of thinking that I think is pretty important. But that itself maybe is its own topic, or could be for certain. That comprehensive thinking is increasingly necessary in our changing globalized world. And this could be, you know, one of the ways that we interpret the tendency in walking and talking not to stick to particular subjects. That I would hope of walking and talking that complex interrelations between modes of knowledge, different registers of reality, ultimate versus relative paradigms, different worldviews. There's so many different ways of thinking about things. There are so many different angles upon the world that it seems that one thing that is needed, in addition to all the specialization that we have, is an increased ability to take up these different worldviews and perspectives and understand them and understand their potential merit as existing within a very incredibly complex ecosystem of different worldviews, if you will. And hopefully thereby maybe reduce the unproductive sorts of friction that we experience in our society. Contribute to increased understanding of other peoples. Less conflict, more synergy. And so I'm generally kind of laying out here a potential mode of seeing, walking, and talking from a utilitarian standpoint. Not necessarily strictly utilitarian in its formal sense, which is something maybe I could try to define later. Just this is just kind of an explaining of one interpretation, one possible interpretation of walking and talking as something with some kind of ethical framework behind it, or an ethical telos, if you will, something that it could be thought of as going towards or moving towards or striving towards in a social mode of thinking, in a global social framework of thinking. Like how this might fit in functionally. That it might potentially promote a relatively challenging way of thinking. A way of thinking where we just don't limit ourselves to one particular worldview, or rather, let me put this another way, that to the extent that it's possible, we kind of examine reality in an honest sort of way where these differing perspectives are continually acknowledged as they arise. So, for instance, maybe I make some assertion, and maybe shortly after making that assertion, I then realize the relativity of it, or that assertion was based on a certain type of mental framework that I was, at the time of making the assertion, unaware of. Let's try to think of an example to make this a little bit more concrete. So, for instance, let's say I'm going on a long rant about walking and talking being utilitarian, and making a strong case for it and whatnot, but then some kind of doubt comes into my mind, or not necessarily doubt, but just this alternative perspective that maybe, say, the utilitarian concept that I was basing my statement off of is very like anthropocentric. And then that there exists like a whole other dimension of thinking that is not anthropocentric, or at least tries not to be, under which the whole notion of utility that I was basing my statement on is just kind of meaningless. This happens a lot in walking and talking. I'll be making an assertion, then I'll realize that the whole premise that I was basing this assertion on doesn't have inherent truth to itself, or it doesn't have inherent meaning in itself. And that tends to happen like all the way down, that anything that I'm saying seems always dependent on some kind of assumed premise of meaning, that it's always existing within a pre-assumed conceptual framework of meaning, that when that conceptual framework of meaning is examined itself, it's found to itself be predicated on a lot of other notions that don't have a priori truth, that don't have some inherent pre-existing meaning that's independent from other things. And it just keeps going. So it's like the rabbit holes are infinite. As you might know from listening to these long rants, the rabbit holes are not only infinite in length, but they're infinite in their potential branchings. At any moment, so many, anything that I say has so many. Boy, I'm having some technical difficulties with my camera. It keeps stopping and saying that it's repairing the file. It's doing this over and over again, and we're just gonna see. I mean, if I've posted this video, it means something has survived from this, but if it continues too much, then I have to stop. But it's moot to say this. Let me just continue where I left off. To me, speaking in this way is what kind of feels the most truthful to me personally. And interestingly enough, it's like that's in relation to, or in response to, so much other thought that I encounter in the world that doesn't totally speak that way. There's a lot of stuff out there that maybe points to this, and that I am referencing consciously or unconsciously, or that informs my thinking about it. But I don't think I've encountered an expression of thinking that's quite of the same type. Which is maybe why I continue to feel so compelled to make these videos, despite a lot of concerns that I have about their accessibility and my kind of pragmatic thoughts about how I might make this series more accessible and how I might make my YouTube channel more accessible overall, hopefully without compromising any of its originality. And by originality, I just mean that it is contributing something valuable by contributing something that is not already out there in a better form, you know? So quite often, maybe I'll listen to a podcast or I will watch another YouTube channel, and I'll greatly appreciate both the content and the skill with which it is expressed, and I'll feel inspired by that. And this happens in a very diverse array of modes. Just to say that there are so many diverse modes of expression, even when we just limit this to verbal expression. So even if I just limit this to like a podcast or speaking format of expression, there are so many diverse modes of expression and so many diverse kind of realms of content. And so there's so much to be inspired by, and sometimes I might see an aspect of something that I think I should try to incorporate more of, try to do a better job at. on my YouTube channel. And so lately, I have been having a lot of thoughts about how I might make this more accessible and how that could be generally a good thing for everyone involved. And one of my thoughts lately has been to make it more indexed, as in making shorter videos that seem to focus more on a particular topic, and then that topic is referenced in the title of the video. And the use that that has is that a viewer could more easily find thought that relates and interfaces with topics that might be on their mind. And so, of course, I do that. I tend to look for content that I'm interested in, of course. Stuff that I am thinking about. But at the same time, it's not necessarily just the content that I'm looking for. In fact, I think it's oftentimes less the subject matter and more so the actual mode of thinking. Like, I'm actually looking for modes of thinking that are exciting to me. And so that's maybe a little bit trickier to index. You kind of have to fish around a bit. And I guess that means finding people where you just resonate with the way that they think. And through that kind of resonance, like, in a way, the subject matter doesn't matter so much, and you're able to access the truth via a lot of subject matter, a lot of different subject matter that you might not otherwise understand when you become familiar with someone's mode of thinking that resonates with you. So I don't really consider myself an expert on any particular topic at all. I mean, if I were to try to reduce it to a topic, then maybe we could say that it's generally things around philosophy, or that it generally has a philosophical bent. But then again, for me, I feel like this activity of speaking, at least for me, kind of exceeds the bounds of what would be thought of as philosophy. I think that what I am doing right now has something to do with a dissonance in me that's created between this desire of making my content more accessible, that is, to let it interface with a more conventional mode of thinking, but still conserve what I think to be at the heart of walking and talking, which is not really about content even. So I'll be in my life outside of walking and talking, outside of making YouTube videos, and I'll kind of understand, maybe very clearly, it would seem like, the need for certain pragmatic adjustments to what I'm doing. A need for it to kind of like fit in, at least on the surface, into categories, into mental categories that we use as a society. So just to put that a little more concretely, to make these videos kind of more readily identifiable on the plane of YouTube videos as a format. So maybe to fall in line a little bit more with an identifiable format of YouTube video, whether it be the blog or the vlog or a podcast format, or conversation or commentary on subjects, you know? To be recognizable, at least on the surface, in that way. That keeps seeming important to me, or like it would be an advantage to do more of that, to pivot towards that a bit. At least when I'm in my daily life. But then I had this experience today, actually. When I was hiking up here, up the mountain, I was even kind of excited about trying to make this video more indexed in terms of topics. And I thought to myself, I would even lay out a sort of table of contents, a rough outline of the subjects that I was going to speak about at the beginning of this video. And then I would kind of move through that outline and speak about them. And so I actually started filming the video like that, and something felt awry to me. Something felt limited. I felt a little uninterested in what I was saying, because I had moved into this realm of actually just kind of repeating or relating information that I had thought about or heard recently that seemed important to me. But I wasn't even doing a good job at it, I felt like, because I wasn't actually engaged with this process. A part of me started to witness from a different level my own talking, my own relating of information, and my own spelling out of a topic from a distance, and felt bored with it. And on one level, one could say, well, sure, maybe that's just to be expected, that you're not always going to feel actively engaged in the work that you're doing, and sometimes it might feel boring, but there is a useful place for just relating information, even if it's information that was just kind of created at a different stage. So maybe what I'm doing now is trying to speak, at least in a fairly coherent way, while maintaining some level of engagement in what I'm saying, some interest, some element of unknowing exactly what I'm going to be saying next. At least a little bit of that. But I can detect a certain amount of longer-term coherency in the way that I'm speaking now, and that I think that I can see that I'm spending a relatively long amount of time digging into what seems to be a topic, you could say. But it's also the topic of precisely what I'm doing. Like the topic is the activity. I'm speaking now about the activity of speaking, which in a sense is really what has always been central to walking and talking. It's really been the very simple basis of it. And interestingly, it's like I'm approaching this center, this self-reflexive center. It's as if I'm approaching it from a different perspective of thinking about its utility and its accessibility, and thinking about more conventional modes of thought in a more conventional mode of thought. That is, thinking about how this activity could interface in a more beneficial way overall with the rest of the world. And so that is, in a sense, a more conventional mode of thought, simply in that first of all, that I'm maintaining kind of subject-object duality, that kind of mode of thinking, that I am maintaining this kind of abstraction of the rest of the world, and thinking about you as an individual and you in the collective sense. And thinking about this third person who is like the potential viewer, the viewer who's not here yet, who could be, who could potentially experience, shall we say, a beneficial expansion of their way of thinking. I mean, that's, this is being very ambitious, making a very bold proposition that this could happen, but nonetheless, why not be optimistic about potential benefits of this YouTube channel, about what I'm doing? Why not? So I'm just saying that something that I'm doing that is a little bit different, I think, now from the usual mode of walking and talking, although in another sense it might be very much the same. But what I'm speaking of as potentially different is a kind of like examining for a longer time this more conventional level of reality of there being first person, second person, and third person. First person being me, second person being you, and third person being other people. Because that's how we think about things, right? That's like real in a sense, right? Of course. Of course that's real, right? Just that there are different people. There's a lot of people in the world. There's you, there's me, and then there's other people. And so, on that basis, trying to make some rational decisions about how all these people could be potentially benefited, and also the future people. Basically, how could we make a better world? This is like a a real thing to think about, right? A better world, one with less suffering, where on the whole, people have more enjoyable lives and enjoy this experience of being alive. And so, of course, we want that I want that for myself and for you and for anyone else, any other person at all. Now, just like speaking in terms of the pragmatic for a moment, what would improve my life at this moment would be drinking a little bit of water. Maybe that could improve your experience right now as well. Consider it. And so, here's another way of thinking about this. Is that in this outside life that I have outside of the act of making a video, when I'm thinking about my YouTube channel and thinking about making videos, and I'm thinking about that in relation to other people that make YouTube videos or host podcasts, etc. Just looking, I'm essentially looking at the rest of the world and thinking about my own actions in relation to that. I'm trying at this moment to hang on to some of the concerns and thoughts that I can remember having in this outside life. So, I mean, just to put it in a more plain English, it's that I'm just trying not to forget about some of the things that I have been thinking recently would make my YouTube channel just better. And not just better for me, but better for you and better for potential future viewers, and better with its knock-on effects, with its general, spreading impact in the world. I'm trying not to forget about ideas that I've had in the recent past about how my actions might make more of a beneficial impact in the world. And it's funny that I seem to need to expend some effort to try and remember these things. And the reason for that is, in this moment right now, I can feel my experience gravitating towards a more post-conventional way of thinking about things. And by post-conventional, another fancy word for that might be trans-rational, or something that's a way of thinking about things that is not logical in that conventional sense of benefit and of utility and of first person, second person, third person thinking. So for instance, I mean, not for instance, but just like the relevant case in point is that in this experience that I am having right now, even though I have to use kind of conventional logical words to describe it, the conventional understanding of existing as a self, as a first person, as me, starts to like get a little more fuzzy and a little bit blurry and eroded. It's and not in any kind of like scary or like disorienting way, but actually in like a really positive feeling, expansive way. And it's like my anxieties dissipate. So there's something that seems kind of paradoxical going on in that as my feeling of being a separate self, of being the first person, kind of dissipates, similarly it's like my conception of you as a second person, as you, kind of dissipates. Like there's not so much of like a concept. There's kind of like a little bit less of a concept of you as a viewer that I'm holding in my head, as like a solid fixed entity. And on the surface that could be maybe interpreted as like some kind of like disacknowledgement or something, or solipsism, but in my experience of it, it actually feels like I actually feel a greater connection to you in light of that. because like what I'm feeling like I'm recognizing you as is not anything fixed, but as just like another manifestation of whatever it is that seems at the core of what I think myself is. And the way that I'm speaking right now feels increasingly compromised. Not that I'm like saying things that are more untrue than usual, but it's that what feels true to me feels like it increasingly escapes the mode in which it's possible to talk about it. And this doesn't feel frustrating. I don't feel frustrated that I'm not exactly able to feel like I can fully, clearly, like, convey the truth through my words. It doesn't feel frustrating that with each thing that I say, I recognize the compromised premise that it's based upon. And I don't feel overwhelmed by the kind of increasing multiplicity of directions that I could go in while still essentially expressing the same core truth, or rather untruth. Like I feel fine about all of this. I feel happy even. I feel pretty happy right now. And but even that is like not really the important thing. Like happiness or unhappiness is not really the important thing. I am kind of noticing myself losing the notion of having a coherent long-term structure to what I'm saying. That is, but at the same time not. So I can remember, like, towards earlier part of this video of speaking in a way that feels very kind of logically consistent, of kind of logically going through the different aspects of the issue that I was talking about, and feeling like there was a good continuity going on, like a good continuity over time. And in a way, I can still kind of sense that feeling, but yet at the same time, I am feeling more of the kind of boundlessness of thought. That is, let me try to express that a little better. It's hard to express, really. That there's this increasing feeling that my thoughts could really go in any direction and still essentially be expressing the same thing. But the thing that they are expressing is actually impossible to express. It's inexpressible. And I'm finding it really interesting that this seemingly inexpressible core to what I'm talking about, in a way, is like, seems totally at odds with all of the intention, all of the ideas that I brought with me coming here. In the days leading up, my thinking about how I should speak, my thinking about what subjects I should talk about, my overall thinking about how I should maybe steer my YouTube channel and how I should steer this series, my thinking about utility and accessibility and all of this stuff, and my laying out of like an outline of something, of topics to talk about that would make sense and would interface a little bit more easily with conventional modes of seeking out knowledge and of interfacing knowledge between one person and another. All of that has basically gone out the window in this moment, as I feel myself kind of like cycling around a vortex, you could call, towards emptiness. And it's a wonderful feeling. It feels like the most wonderful feeling. And it's like happening like despite everything else, despite my intentions, despite my trying to gain another kind of like meta perspective on my own habits. So maybe previously I was, thinking about this issue of accessibility or legibility, like findability, like how can this be found easier? How can, essentially, like, how can the essence of what I would wish to convey through my YouTube channel be easier for people to find? And so, all these thoughts about how I can kind of create a more user-friendly interface for it, put a handle on it by the use of identifiable concepts and topics and titles and subjects of videos, like, so my kind of self-observation that I've thought about that sort of thing a lot, and then yet when I go out and walk and talk, that tends to kind of go out the window, and I gravitate towards this more self-reflexive mode that gravitates towards this center of what we could call emptiness or untruth, or something that is beyond words. And that experience shifts into this total translogical, unconventional register. And so I'm like in the outside life, in my conventional logical thinking to myself, okay, let's try not to do that this time. Let's try to stay very, like let's maintain like a level of rationality that could increase the sort of like pragmatic benefit, or just the benefit, overall benefit to the world overall, of the YouTube channel. Okay, hold that for just hold on a minute. I'm gonna go take a pee, and just, I'm just kind of like continuing to abide by the conventions of the Walking and Talking series by leaving the camera running in a different direction while I take a pee, and I'll be right back. Wow, my mind is really, it feels like it's kind of on fire with like a lot of things that I'm feeling like excited to just say, and so I'm trying to actually just like remain calm enough to speak in a understandable way. But now of course I'm like forgetting what I was going to say. Oh yeah, it's like so I'm like trying to like maintain kind of a healthy level of like, kind of self-awareness or self-skepticism, or let's just say like a healthy level of self-awareness. So the form that's taking lately is like, so this kind of like different type of experience that I'm talking to you about feels to me, when I'm having it, it feels like a greater level of truth is accessed than conventional concerns. Or it's as if like these notions of utility that I'm talking about, and notions of like of benefit, of helping the world and such, it feels like the kind of altered mode of experience in a way kind of negates those things, or makes them feel like relative. It makes them feel relatively limited ways of viewing reality in comparison to this more expansive feeling where the actual experience of self falls away, and the actual experience of the world as something separate falls away. And so I I have been trying to maintain a level of skepticism towards that perspective, and be like, is that actually like a belief? Is that actually um, just kind of like based on a conceptual framework that's in fact very subjective? That is it actually kind of, is that mode of experience that I'm referring to as like the loss of self, the loss of separation between self and other, is that in fact just another mode of selving? That is in fact just like another kind of like conceptual framing of my experience that is, of course, just, merely like subjective and relative to everyone else's experience. It seems like a rational thing to consider, right? Just to try to maintain just like a type of vigilance against like kind of falling into some kind of fantasy where am I merely just thinking that I am having some form of transcendent experience that transcends the necessary utility of benefiting others and that sort of thing. I think that's like a healthy skepticism to have, but I also have to say that the premise that proposition is dependent on is actually, I think, kind of illusory, because like now we have to address some premises that I've been basing these statements on, that are in fact not really true. But it's like in the process of like explaining something, setting up this framework, it's like necessary sometimes to speak in relative ways. That is, to speak in to make statements or explanations that are founded upon premises that aren't totally true. And the most important one of these is just this notion of me having an experience. Like me having an experience of loss of self. That doesn't make sense. That's totally paradoxical. You know what I mean? It's not me having an experience if there's no me. And in fact, if there is no me, there's no actual experience. And so maybe you can understand that this is the way in which everything said here is basically untrue. And yet it's trying to be as true as possible. And then we discover that even this notion of truth is something that doesn't have a basis to it. It doesn't have a ground to it. It has relative truth, that things can be less untrue, that, in this relative world, we can definitely understand the difference between a lie and something that's basically true, or that it is truthful, we could say. Like, it's maybe a little more honest to speak of things being truthful, as in that implies more of like the verb nature of truth rather than the noun nature of truth. Let's bookmark that and maybe come back to it, because I wanna return now to this basic premise that I've kind of had to base a lot of this talking on, the talk about having an altered experience, the talk about having an experience that transcends first person, second person, third person logic, this conventional logic. And once again, I like come up against this wall, in that if I think about it, I can't say anything true about it. Like, it's not possible. And even the statement that I'm saying now is built upon this kind of logic. It's kind of amazing. So do we just assiduously avoid the use of any pronouns at all, and just kind of speak in terms of statements of assertions or negations? It's amazing. I really can't even claim to understand it. It's like you and I are really in the same boat here. That we've always kind of been in the same boat. That the kind of notion that I could really explain anything, or that there's even such a thing as explanation, really kind of feels just like illusory, like it just doesn't hold water. And yet, like, it's so paradoxical, because, like, of course I can recall via memory this conventional mode of understanding, this what we could call a dualistic experience of reality, the existence of self. I can seem to remember that. And I mean, like, I'm saying that, and of course, like, the way that I'm saying it is a contradiction in terms. And that I can conceive of the necessity of helping people, of helping the world, of doing pragmatic, beneficial things. And I can't arrive by any logical means at any alternative to that. I can't say in any true sense that doesn't matter. And of course, you know, it certainly seems like I'm talking to you and potentially to others, and that I'm using the English language in order to communicate something. Or it could even be said that I'm attempting, at least attempting, to do something beneficial for the world, and yet at the same time, like, all of that is untrue. Do you follow me? I mean, like, maybe you follow me, but it's not really understandable. Like, if you are actually following me, then you are confused right now. It's like this confusion, or this paradox is like the most salient and the most essential character of this, or quality of this. Like, this is paradox. This is contradiction. It doesn't make sense. And this comes from me just trying to make sense. Like, I approached this video thinking very strongly that I should just make sense. That would be a good thing. It would be a good thing if I could just make perfect sense in this video, and benefit, conferring benefit to myself and to others, hopefully. Or at least trying. At least operating under a coherent conceptual framework with the best of my understanding of the world and of communication and of cause and effect and so on. I would talk about subjects that would be of general benefit for more people to know about and be aware of and think about. And yet, this experience, and now, like, I feel as if I should be qualifying absolutely everything that I say in a form of scare quotes. So you can just kind of like consider there to be an open scare quote on everything that I say now. But then there has to be, interior quotes. There has to be kind of like a infinite regress of quotes within quotes, qualifying the infinite levels of untruth that underlie everything that can be even said. This video has totally escaped my intentions. This video is out of control. There isn't a me controlling this. And I'm like, I'm at the same time actually maintaining. There's at the same time like this thought going on that's maintaining a type of skepticism of isn't this merely a self that is an exponent of a particular philosophical framework that is spouting off these ideas of non-self and of emptiness, or whatever words we want to use. And yet that skeptical thought is not able to like overcome and establish for itself some sovereign individual who is in control of this. It's simply not happening. Like the real nature of this experience, and I'm especially using the word experience even in scare quotes, is something totally uncontrolled, without agency. There's not a higher self. There's just this, you know? It's like I might be tempted to say there's just this experience, but there's not. It's like that's not even the truth of the matter. Like the notion of experience still lies in this realm of conventional logic, of that there's some kind of self, there's some kind of subject that has an experience. And it's wild. This is fucking wild. Like I just thought I was gonna I thought I would come up here and talk about useful things, pragmatic things. And I thought I would have some control over my life. I thought I'll shape my life. I will make some conscious decisions to steer my YouTube channel in a beneficial way, and I'll to benefit myself and benefit others, benefit the world at large. So I'll, consciously shape the trajectory of my life. And that's just been completely obliterated. That's just like, at this point, none of that even has a leg to stand on. Like there's not even that, the premise of myself and my life, really. There's no premise of the existence of individuals on which to confer benefit. I'm like, what the fuck? Like all my noblest aspirations are completely undermined by this just like completely uncontrolled like any word that I want to choose is like not right, you know? Like this just completely out of control, like unfolding. But it's not even unfolding, because like these notions of time as linear is like, that doesn't work here either. And yet like I can't get at anything. I can't even come close to expressing anything true, because this paradox keeps arising. Because like, all, you know, on this other hand, all we have to do is look. There's something happening here. I'm talking. You're watching a YouTube video. Like, look at that. That seems to be something. There's something happening. There kind of seems to be linear time. There's your memories. There's your projected future. All this stuff. There's, you know, the chair that you're sitting in or not sitting, or the floor that you're standing in seems hard or something. But actually, none of this has any basis. And even every single statement that I say doesn't actually have basis, because it's like everything that I say is so easily controverted, you know? It's like it's completely in conflict with observed reality. As you might be, you know, noting, you might be raising objections and to the truth of what I'm saying, and your objections are, you know, they're founded. But then also they're not. I mean, I'm just saying that your objections are valid in the sense that they are just kind of like, they're pointing to one aspect of this paradox. Which is, it sure as hell seems like I'm an individual in the world, experiencing things. It sure seems like this ground is solid, like this floor is solid, you know? But I will like maybe try to explain that this variety of objection, or this type of argument that, well, I certainly seem real. If I punch you in the face, won't you say ouch? And why don't I jump off a bridge? And why does the floor feel solid? And why can't I pass my hand right through it if there's no self and there's no world? This sort of thing. And let's just like, that actually is a pretty big, like, mistaken way of thinking about things. And let's just kind of examine this notion that the floor, that the ground is, that things are solid, that because you can touch them and you can see them, that they must be real. And this is like, what this is doing is imagining an alternate reality in which there's still the you perceiving, but then the other things like either aren't there or they somehow appear like very ethereal or something, like the notion that you could experience the floor not being there, the notion that you could experience the table not being there is a mistaken notion. It's not possible to experience the absence of things, actually. It's not possible to experience the non-existence of things. I'm not saying that you can't, there's not the experience of like missing something. I'm saying that that like sensing something is actually conceptually framed. That the act of sensing, saying like I see something or I feel something, is dependent on this dual construction of there being a something and there being a me, and sensing being the component of that construction that connects the two. And that this construction has no inherent basis. That more fundamentally, there's just this kind of happening. There's just this happening. It's not, and so what I'm saying is that there isn't another truth that is somehow like beyond your senses. That I'm saying that like this experience isn't illusory in the sense that there's an other more true experience on the same register of experience, which is how it would be very tempting to think about it, because that is actually thinking about conventional reality in the same mode of conventional reality, to posit a different conventional reality that's like more true. That's just kind of like a missing of the whole thing. And kind of like, in the same sense, that's why that what I'm saying doesn't imply any kind of ethical nihilism, because it's not saying that what appears in conventional reality of the dualistic existence of you and me and the rest of the world, it's not saying that it's not saying that like the morality or ethics that appear in conventional reality have some kind of more true alternative that would appear in the same register of conventional reality. Let me try and see if I can. I'm trying as hard as I can to like maybe explain it in the clearest way possible, even though it's like ultimately inexpressible and just impossible. But it's like what's required is to always like look for the beyond of the words. Yeah, it's like, it's like an objection that might arise here that would seem to be on ethical grounds that, like, well, if none of this is real, then like nothing matters, and so I can do anything I want. But I think that's just like kind of like a misinterpretation and an over application. I don't know. It's like let me admit that I'm like feeling a little confused now, because it's like there's I'm like talking about a so-called conventional reality. I'm like talking about a so-called like regular life. I'm talking about some kind of like plane of existence where there's a you and a me and other people, and things are real, and time is real, and time passes. And yet, at the same time, I just can't deny this reality that all of that is like like a kind of projection out of nothingness, a projection like of nothingness. It's like a projection out of no time, no self, no thing. Or rather than being a projection, like it just is that. That the appearance of time is no time. It's in fact a perfect expression of it. And that the appearance of self, the illusion of self, is the perfect expression of no self. And the appearance of things is the perfect expression of no thing. And I feel like I could go down some long-winded elaborations on those assertions. I probably will inevitably do that. But first, I need to drink some water. And let me just kind of like reiterate the absolute inadequacy of anything that I could possibly say here. It's completely inadequate. Nothing that I say even like approaches truth. It's not possible. Not even this statement. Not even that very self-negation. It's nothing but ongoing paradox. Like I remember thinking, I can remember thinking to myself, maybe I just like won't get into talking about this no self, this non-dual philosophy, as it were. Maybe I just won't get into that. I'll stay on, more conventional topics. And that's like it's like an impossibility. Like there's actually no conventional world. They're like in the most speaking in the most truthful way that I can even attempt to speak. is that there's no world. There's no truth. There's no conventional logic. So maybe just to come back and elaborate on this idea that that the appearance of self, or the illusion of self, is in fact the expression of no self. Man, I don't know. I can't do it. It's not possible. It's like this is the failure of apprehending reality. This is the failure to apprehend any truth. And it's like all that can happen. And it's just like fantastically, wildly, wonderfully out of control. And it's like, I think I'm noticing myself losing my train of thoughts more here, and we can imagine that from a certain perspective as potentially having some physiological cause. So perhaps I'm getting more tired or something, and so my working memory capacity is diminishing. Yet at the same time, I think it's also reflective of this increasing recognition of the total impossibility of saying anything meaningful. It's totally impossible here. Even when that assertion flows from the very concerted and strategic attempt at being as meaningful as possible, attempting to say the most meaningful things possible, the most beneficial things possible, is resulting in the recognition of the non-existence of meaning, the impossibility of meaning, the baselessness of concepts like benefit. And I'm just going to have to continue making constant disclaimers to sort of refute what I'm imagining to be common or easy misinterpretations of what I'm saying. So, for instance, if I speak of the baselessness of the concept of benefit, then I'm not affirming its opposite of harm or something. I'm not saying that in any way benefit is denigrated to some lower level than harm. It's not, because harm is equally meaningless. But maybe more important to say is that we're not denigrating the notion of pragmatism or functioning or ethics below a conventional understanding of reality, which could then lead towards an ethical nihilism where you're saying, okay, then it's okay to do something. No. It's really like a denigration of all of reality. But it's not actually a denigration. It's not us doing something. There's not any agent here doing anything. There's not any change to be made. There's no change possible. There's no change possible, and there's not even time, It's like time is an illusory construction. There's no change, and there's no stasis either. And I recognize that there's a kind of mental gravitational pull towards trying to apply what's going on, to try and get wisdom or get understanding or get meaning out of this, and to apply it to the world. I recognize that's kind of that's kind of like a mental activity that has a tremendous amount of gravity with it to attempt to solidify out of this meaninglessness, out of this emptiness, out of this nothingness, to solidify some kind of meaningful application of knowledge into the rest of the world. There's this gravity towards trying to look for the practical or the ethical implications to this, but in fact that they aren't real, that this is not wisdom, this is not knowledge, this doesn't have implications or applications, but that this mental activity, we'll call it, of solidification into meaning, that's also a totally natural occurrence. That's totally natural expression of what is or isn't going on here. And it is in fact not even a problem in the ultimate level. It's like it is a mistake in one sense, in that it's like continuing to like project and solidify and concretize a solid seeming reality that has meaning and continuity. A reality in which you exist as an entity, which you are important. This you, like who is trying and me even as well. Like both of us, we're trying, like kind of like habitually, with this kind of like gravitational pull to like extract out of this, out of the pure emptiness of this, some kind of application for us that will be beneficial for us. Some way that we can be a better person, that we could be happier, more fulfilled, how we might be able to benefit the world, how we might be able to be a more beneficial person in the world. And yet that's all a mistake. Just in the sense that that's untrue, that there just is not meaning. And yet at the same time, that's that activity, if we want to call it that, is at the same time just the perfect expression of the emptiness. And yeah, I'm probably failing to describe this in a clear way, which, I think that's kind of inevitable, but I'm trying anyways. Even though everything that I'm saying is just wrong. Like, even for me to say I'm trying to explain something is not true. It's like on some apparent level, it's kind of true. But, what would ostensibly be being attempted at expressed, what is ostensibly trying to be expressed, is something without agency, that is something that like the notion of effort or trying is a meaningless idea. And even anything like existence is a meaningless idea to it. And even the notion of it being something is meaningless. But just to maybe like maybe like back off a little bit in tone, I'll just kind of reflect here that I'm like, I'm remembering the beginning of this video and my kind of positive emotional tone, and this referring, my reference towards like the experience of expanding, the experience of my anxieties dissipating, and this being like a really positive thing. But like now I kind of have to reflect upon this notion of that being a positive experience, or an experience at all, is coming from a very relative notion of existing as a self. Because it's like, paradoxically enough, like the telos of that expansion, that telos of the relaxing of the like constricted feelings of being a self who needs to look after it for itself and look after its concerns and protect itself, the end point of that is the very absence of that self completely. And without the self, there's no experience. And without that, there's no positive or negative. There's no good or bad. It's like the end game of benefit is the absence of good or bad. I mean, that's, of course, a compromised way to say it, but we could also think of it as like any good approaching ultimate good is merely like the absence of dualistic types, dualistic like registers of existence. Which, that does entail the absence of suffering. It is an absence of suffering. But it's as if the deepest, most profound absence of suffering entails the absence of self, and thus it can't even be an experience. There's no one left to experience it. And so I'll say, in a certain sense, that like, so I'm going to say in an untrue sense that this experience is like the epitome of what one could want from life. I mean, just speaking from like personally, and I'm speaking, in a very relative way here, that this experience is everything that I want out of life. Like anything good that I could be looking for from life. This is it. Like this, and it's actually beyond it. It's actually more. It's actually like more good than a person could ever want, than a person could ever be seeking for. It's a good that is not even like containable by a person. It's not even experienceable. Like experience can't even contain it. It explodes beyond the boundary of selfhood and of experience. And it's just this. It's just this. And it's always this. And yet, this relativity is always seems, at least, it always seems that there's like the relative, the real hard pragmatism of life. It certainly seems. Like, for instance, I can say that in some weird sense that like this is caused by something that this experience that I'm having. So like we're already kind of on this dual mode of examining things, which is fine. We can talk that way for a little bit. This experience that I'm having. So like I am having an experience. We could say that is contributed to by a number of causes. For instance, my ongoing practice of making these videos, my repetition of these videos, my encountering of other people's thoughts and philosophies, and whatever other life experiences that I've had. And we can say that my mental emotional state is contributed to by physiological factors like my health, and that my health is caused in part by my lifestyle decisions and my dietary decisions, and the fact of me, trying to implement a relatively ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting, leading towards a more stable blood sugar level and thus a more stable mood and the ability to do this activity for a long period of time and retain some, ongoing cognitive function, etc., etc., etc. Basically, all the causes of life. But then, of course we can talk about that. And that's only natural. Like I could go on a little tangent of here, like extolling the benefits of dropping the refined carbs out of your diet and avoiding soybean oil and canola oil and etc., and how that, and intermittent fasting, and how that will regulate your emotions to allow for a more unfettered experience of expansion, of a better mood that equates to a relaxation of the constrictive, the contractive energies that manifest as the self. I can speak like that, and it's fun. It's fun even, and I'm actually happy to, at least at this point, to talk about those relative factors, those relative kind of planes of existence. But I can't help but also keep in mind the limitation of that way of thinking, because it's kind of like, I mean, it's not really a limitation, but it's simply that, like, if you look at things like cause and effect and you actually follow any train of cause and effect, it takes you into infinity. You know what I mean? Like if you try to trace any chain of cause and effect, it's like, like asking, like, what is the reason that I am here making this video right now? And what is the reason that you are here watching this video? Like, what's the reason? And then it's evident that we can interpret many versions of the reason. So like one interpretation, and everybody wants one of these. Everybody wants one of these explanations. Just tell me, just tell me the reason that you're doing this, and so I can feel okay. But, and of course, like any of these like causations is in fact going to be an interpretation. So like maybe like I would say that I'm making this video because it's art, and because of my personal history of encountering performance and conceptual art, and my interpretation of the history of art leads me towards doing this activity or something like that. And that would be one interpretation. But then kind of equally true or equally untrue, I could also say that I make videos that are like this because of my history of like a meditation practice and the form of thinking that meditation has shaped in me, and this is an interpretation of my understanding of various like Eastern thought or so on, or this is my expression of whatever insight I might have gained from meditating a lot, or something like that. And that would be kind of like an equal interpretation. Or you could look at it from this other angle of being like, why do you make such pointless videos or whatever? And like, it could be like, you know, I could speak it in like socioeconomic terms of like, you know, I was like, you know, raised in a middle class but very bohemian family, and through the process of like strategic downward mobility, I've ended up with a lot of time on my hands that is not beholden to any employer or something like that. And that would be, you know, an equally valid interpretation of things. And then, you know, just by that process, like we realize that all of these causalities are in fact just kind of like stories. They're and it's fine, but none of them have like inherent truth to them. All of them are completely dependent on a number of other concepts, memories, other illusions, basically. They don't have inherent substance. And what they are, and in fact, like what all of this is, I mean, another way of looking at it is the efflux, as the as kind of like the Platonist philosopher Plotinus would put it. Plotinus talks about reflux and efflux. Reflux being the returning to the one, the great unity, the center of all things, and efflux being the multitudinous proliferation of the many, the world, the outflowing of the world, the many things that appear. Look at that cute bird. And now, like, that's kind of put into a temporal framework of thinking about it, of like, you know, like, we could think about reflux temporally, maybe in an example of like a person practicing a spiritual practice, and maybe like through meditation or whatever practice, seeming to have this experience of like de-manifesting and like returning to like the great unknown source of all things. Or we could think of efflux in a temporal way of just like the unfolding of the universe and its manifestation into the many things. And like, so like personally, the manifestation into like a multitude of thoughts and experiences, and, you know, experiences of selfhood and of world, like that being efflux, if we want to. But But ultimately, like, putting those things in terms of temporality, or putting them in terms of any agency, or putting them in terms of any personhood, is ultimately a compromised way of talking about them. But of course this is fine, because like ultimately it's like the reflux is the efflux, the one is the many, and there isn't really any linear time, and there isn't really any person to have experience in the first place. But that the efflux is like simultaneously the reflux in such a way that there's really neither. Or to maybe try and put this like in like personal terms, that like the relative experience of self as separate from reality is actually not different from the dissolution of self into so-called unity. And that might require a little bit of further clarification, which I will attempt to do. Which is that like let's like kind of like examine this notion that, say, a person could experience enlightenment. Let's just like imagine that, because that seems like a common preoccupation, and a common, like actually a very common mythology. And especially if we kind of broaden it to really include any of the soteriological religions that we have. And by soteriological, I mean related to the notion of salvation. So it's like, hello. It's like pretty much most dominant religions, most widespread religions have this element of salvation in one form or another. So like Christianity, of course, like salvation is in the afterlife, when you transcend this mortal coil, and you can kind of be in God's presence in heaven, and the ending of suffering. And then it's in Buddhism as well, as like contained in this notion of enlightenment or nirvana, or the release from the birth and death cycle. Release from the cycle of birth and death, which is like that is imagined as nirvana, as like the ultimate ending of suffering, because you no longer manifest as an individual, and the individual is like the separateness from the world that is the root of suffering. And like that's essentially true. I would say that like that suffering is at least highly tied into how extremely one is experiencing their separate self, their individuation, as opposed to the world. So this is just kind of like another shape of this idea of salvation, that one can be saved. The idea that one could experience the absence of suffering. That one, and it's essentially saying that one could have the experience of not being a self. And if you actually examine that proposition, it's a contradiction in terms. It's like experience and selfhood create each other. Experience and selfhood are simply two sides of the same coin. They are just, they imply the existence of each other. They necessitate the existence of each other. And so, like, to me, it seems fairly obvious that any kind of notion of nirvana as an experience, it is carrying with it the continued idea that you are a self who's going to experience that. And it's that itself is just like another expression of that duality. This seeking of something resembling nirvana or salvation or whatever is totally a manifestation of the exact same thing that suffering is, that separateness is, that individuation is. So I'm basically saying that on one hand, there is no salvation for you, no salvation for any person. But then on the other hand, that absolutely everything is already salvation. It's already saved. Is already nirvana, if you will. But it's like that's kind of like a, you know, a very loaded term at this point. But I was saying all that to make another point. Let me try and remember what that was. Yeah, something about the soteriological religions. Oh yeah, in the sense of okay, so I think I got it now. So let's still kind of like imagine some like the concept of nirvana or enlightenment or this ultimately becoming one. Like so you have to look at this concept of the one and what it entails. What is really meant by like the ultimate, the universal, that you could connect with, that you could be one with. And it has to be acknowledged that, like, say if that were to happen, say if a person were to, like, quote unquote gain enlightenment or like achieve total dissolution into the absolute, the total dissolution of self versus other. So an actual non-dual state of being, like pretending that that's possible. Let's examine that claim for a second. It's just that total connection with the one, there's no possible experience of that. There can't be any one left to experience totality. It's a total contradiction in terms. Like, this has to be acknowledged. You cannot pretend that there is some person, some subject, you can't even pretend that there is any like evidence of like that. There's no even like residue of some version of selfhood or some version of subjectivity, even if you think of it as like your big self, your capital S self or something, that could remain to experience totality, because it cannot experience itself. I mean, I know that and so that kind of like maybe gives rise to a metaphor that I've heard, maybe you've heard it too, of like what you are as being, the universe playing hide and seek with itself, the universe hiding itself in order to see itself. Because if it weren't hiding, then there is no experience. It's like it has to hide from itself in order for there to be experience and for there to be something experienced. Like hiding from itself in order to find itself, that sort of thing. And that's like that is actually maybe like a truer metaphor in relation to this notion of a separate nirvana, a separate realization of oneness. Because what that then points to is like, okay, so why then this efflux? Why this manifestation? Why this appearance of the self and of the world? Why this appearance of like the specific? And so, thinking on the terms of that metaphor, it makes a kind of sense, right? That if the oneness is impossible to be experienced, and therefore, like, if it were for it to be experienced totally, is effectively the same thing as nothingness. You know what I mean? Like if the experience of totality leaves nothing left of the experiencer to experience anything, then it is the same as nothingness, right? Doesn't that, I believe that follows logically. And so like, paradoxically, what that leaves us with is a totality and a simultaneous nothing. that if you're to posit the existence of any totality, that is, like, to posit the existence of any, empirical reality, so to speak, that logically you simultaneously have to posit a nothingness that it is. And so then you have, like, if the totality is nothing and cannot be experienced, then, like, what that leaves is, like, incomplete experience. Like, it seems like in that there could be incomplete experience, or experience of incompleteness. So maybe we say, we take the metaphor and say, what we are is the universe appearing to, like, pinch off and separate a little part of itself so that it can experience itself. So that, like, that experiencer is necessarily incomplete, and then what is experienced is necessarily incomplete. I think that follows pretty logically, that any experiencer is necessarily an incomplete manifestation of totality or of nothingness, and anything that is experienced is an incomplete manifestation of totality or nothingness. And so it could be said there that essentially the only thing that can exist in terms of any, like, conventional notion of what can exist is necessarily incomplete, on both subject and object sides of the coin. It's necessarily incompleteness. And I would say that one could look at absolutely everything that seems to manifest, everything that appears, as a perfect expression of incompleteness. The fact that you can never be finally satisfied. The fact that you can never finally reach the end point of your life goals. That you can never finally hammer anything down. You can never finally solve all the problems. That the experience of being human is one of, like, a constant striving, etc., and like even the manifestation of temporal time, the fact that we can't even grasp onto a solid now. We can't grasp onto a present moment. It's always transient. You can't even perceive now. You can't even perceive any fundamental now with, like, any kind of, like, atomic inherent substance to it. The fact that there's no now that is in any way complete. In fact, there's basically no now at all. And then so like the void of now presents itself as past and future. And the void of the void of selfhood, the absence of selfhood, the fact that you cannot pinpoint any atom that is like the kernel, the core of the self, ever, and if you look for it, you only find absence. That absence, that void, kind of like weirdly enough, like is kind of expressed as the story of self, the complex interlocking web of past memories and thoughts and concepts that are kind of thought to be the self, but if you look at any of them, they have nothing to do with the self. And so like this dilemma that so-called dilemma, this paradoxical quality of this experience, the fact that not even this can like arrive at any real truth, the fact that everything that I can appear to say is like always untrue in a sense. I mean, it is always conditioned. It always is always part of the conditioned sort of cause and effect appearance of the relative existence. So essentially, just putting it in simpler terms, the fact that even in 4 hours we can't really arrive at any truth is another perfect expression of this incompleteness that is kind of all that can seem to exist. And like everything, absolutely everything is a manifestation of that. So even like our pragmatic limitations, like considering the sort of conventional logic that I'll have to eat at some point, that I have to keep drinking water, that the batteries in this camera have to hold up, etc. That those sorts of factors like have this potential to impinge on whatever profound like philosophical insight or spiritual truth that I might be spouting off here, is another manifestation of that. The fact, like the hard fact that like, the seemingly hard fact of like the stories, what I'm referring to as these like relative level of appearance, or what I'm referring to as these stories that we're talking about, that they will always continue to impinge on any profundity that we might otherwise seem to be able to get at, and be basically revealing it as bullshit, is another kind of perfect expression of it. There's this undeniable level in which like this video is bullshit, you know? This level in which, like, you'll get done watching this or stop watching it at some point, and somebody will, you know, just say anything to you about life. Hey, do you want to go get dinner? Or like anything practical, like it's time to go to sleep or whatever, or the fact that you get tired or hungry or whatever, and that those factors seem to become real, and they essentially do become real, is just another expression of the fact that you cannot get to reality. You cannot get to truth. You cannot even experience it. You cannot get wholeness in any terms that can really be conceived of. It's like the partiality is the wholeness. The limitation is the wholeness. The ongoing problematic nature of life is the wholeness. Is the salvation. Is you know, they are just the same. But then even, you know, using the words like wholeness or salvation, like, also is kind of loaded in a way that's not entirely true. Just that there is no wholeness, there is no salvation effectively. And yet everything is it already. It's like, yeah, like I said before, it's nothing but endless paradox upon paradox into infinity. And by paradox, I basically mean like impossibility. That the way things are is impossible. And it's the way they are. And so if you want, just take absolutely anything as the perfect expression of the exact same thing that I seem to be saying. Silence is the same thing. Silence is no more or less meaningful. Look at that, that's insane. Let me get the Nonsense and sense are essentially the same thing. Let's just why not indulge in some visual stimulation? Look at this. What is going on with this tree? It's nuts. It's just like in anything there's like a infinite degrees of complexity that are infinitely inconceivable. Like this tree, like we absolutely cannot like apprehend a real understanding of this tree. Even the word tree is like, a reductive concept, of course, but like it is the same of any quote unquote experience, that it is a degree of complexity that can never ever at all be even close to apprehended. Like the apparent apprehension or knowledge of anything, all it is limitation, and that's perfectly fine and natural. Like a knowledge about this tree in whatever form you want to frame it, whether it be botany, like a botanical description of the species, or ecological, talking about its interrelationship with other things, or like even if you want to look at it at a cellular level, or even a physical level. These are all different descriptions that are in no way the tree. There's absolutely no level at which the tree is apprehended. It's only limitation. And I think that I think that's essentially what the experience of beauty is, or truth for that matter. But talking about beauty, to me, like the experience of beauty is always like is more just like a turned up experience of the unapprehendable, the incomprehensibility of something, so like a richness, let's say, of like aesthetic quality that presents as having some level of comprehension, that there's some like sense making aspect of it, that there's some aspect of it that forms a kind of meaning, an experience, an experience of meaning, and yet implied in that meaning, or that implied in the very comprehension of it, is its very incomprehensibility. I don't know, like if you've ever had like a powerful experience looking at a painting or listening to a piece of music, it's like something in this is resonating with me, and I feel like I understand it, and yet at the same time, like that satisfying element also contains the unsatisfying element of like, I want more of this. I want to experience this even more. I want to delve in even deeper and like try to apprehend every minute detail of it. But then you keep discovering that each detail reveals within it a whole nother level of detail that you have not yet even perceived. That sort of experience, is what I'm talking about as beauty. And I'm just saying that is fundamental to reality. And it's kind of the same with truth. Like it's like if we try to nail down what truth is, there's something that where it's like there's a consistent correspondence with experience, that like truth kind of like appears as like the experience of truth, I would say, is like a concordance of the different aspects of reality, or of what would otherwise be discordant aspects of reality, or realities in which the aspects of reality in which the connection is unknown or something. And then you have an experience of relative understanding where previously disparate angles on reality come into a kind of accordance. We experience that as truth, and yet I think always within that experience of truth, or understanding of truth, is always there's always embedded the continuation of the quest for it. It always entails within it its exact opposite of knowing that you don't know, of like a new, like a kind of like further a further apprehension of aspects of reality that are now in discordance. I don't know if that makes any sense. That now there are other aspects of experience, or aspects of reality that call out their problematic nature, that call out their paradox, that call for resolution. So like this, I guess this is just another way of talking about the more verbal quality of truth, but also the fact that it just is untruth just as much. I don't know if it's probably not the most clear way of stating it, but there you have it. Like this is insane. This experience of being up on this mountain. We're on the Appalachian Trail, and like it's like these rocks, you know. Even any one of these rocks, like I feel in this moment could contain like an unending degree of just visual interest, and yet like combined with that visual interest, an unending kind of story of its own creation, its history or slash its geology that you know points to a time span that is way far beyond even the existence of a human, you know. It's like this apparently visual experience just of this here, like, is inextricable from a reality without any human observer. Like, what the fuck? And then, like, and so there seems to exist this field of geology that can construct kind of a story of how the Appalachian Mountains were created through, you know, tectonic plates, tectonic activity and mountain raising, collision of a bunch of different collision events, and all of this taking place on a time scale that's absolutely impossible to conceive of. You know, with any kind of like relation to human lifespan. It's an incredible, it's really an incredible, like, mind-blowing story, just like the knowledge of geology. The story of how these like very ordinary things came to be, and yet that all of that knowledge just points to a whole, it just points to a whole absence. It points to like the vacuity of knowledge. It points to the absence of knowledge. It's even like pointing to very much like a beyond of even biology. And like asking us, I mean, if you ask me, it's like asking us to like imagine a world that doesn't even involve perception before there was even an organism, you know? Before the advent of any sensory organ. No eyes yet, no life. You know? It's like every amount of knowledge is like just beckoning, every little piece of knowledge is just beckoning us to go, to follow it into a just incredible, like, vast potential. Like stretching of what it means to exist at all. I don't know, I'm feel like I'm starting to babble a little bit and wax a little bit too poetic or something, but I guess that's okay. This is what happens when you walk and talk for hours. especially on a nice ass day. And something that's like, you know, could be thought of as simultaneously interesting and frustrating at this moment is that I'm just taking a personal example. It's like I notice myself getting a little bit more tired and a little bit more hungry as I go on, and thirsty. I might actually be running a little low on water. And so in one way, I could interpret this as the apparent pragmatic starting to encroach on our waxing philosophical. The everyday encroaching on the would-be transcendent. And yet, at the same time, it's also just totally interesting and fascinating. The just like the total inconsistency of experience, you know, like that. You know, as time goes on, it's like there's no continuity, there's no consistency in experience. Like what I say in one moment will not be true the next moment to me. And it's like, just as you would rightly point out, that, like, you know, well, you probably wouldn't be talking about no self if you were starving. And you're absolutely right. That's absolutely true. And it's just like, even evidenced as like probably like the more hungry or the tireder I get, like the more those types of concerns will start to like creep into what I'm saying and creep into our experience, we could say. And it's the same way that the pragmatic, ethical considerations always encroach. That, like, you know, your potential question about, okay, well, what about all the violence and the suffering and the people that are dealing with living conditions that don't afford them any time or energy to think about all this highfalutin philosophical shit that you're spouting off, Ben? And I would say you're completely right. That, like, that is a real problem, and it is a manifestation. You know, that is another manifestation of like everything that I've been talking about, which is not to say that you like magically resolve it, and that like that hunger and violence are no longer problems and that sort of thing. It's like, no, they're very much problems. And so this is the way that I'm saying that, like, pragmatism, practicality, ethics, helping, benefiting people is like is just as implicated in all this philosophizing. It's not like fixed, you know, it's not fixed by this. It's implicated in it that you have that, you know, I mean, I'm not going to say like, you know, we can't draw from this, like, I don't think, like, specific applications, like the things that I'm saying aren't specifically applicable towards strategy and that sort of thing. It's like, that's a whole nother, those are specific considerations, you know? So in the way that, like, but then those appear, you know, like that, those specific sort of like ethical mandates, they come in, they appear, I mean, to you. And like, so like, to me, just like taking like looking at my immediate pragmatic concerns that encroach, and they're specific, that I'm getting thirsty, and I just needed to remind myself of that, by the way, and that I'm probably running low on water. Oh yeah, okay. I'm totally out of water. Okay, so this is a specific problem, and I'm a little bit far, you know, from the car. And then, I mean, just give me a moment. I'm a little distracted because there's somebody walking here. Here's another, you know, the specific, the pragmatic encroaches, we'll say, or just like appears. Hello.
How you doing?
Pretty good.
Nice day out, huh?
Yeah, really nice.
How we going?
You too. As it's not really on a different, plane of reality, or in any way like sub-important. It's not there, it's not on some lower hierarchical rung of reality. It's like of the same importance, I'm saying, which is, you know, ultimately none, but getting a little confused here. But there are a lot of kind of simplified and compromised ways that I could talk about this relationship, and so I'm trying to kind of like maybe come up with one that doesn't feel too overly simplified or overly compromised. I suppose that any explanation of the ethical implications of the sort of beyond that is maybe being pointed at or referenced here always depends on a lot of metaphor, and I think that's like pretty natural. And so like we can kind of I mean, I think this is where I'm like really kind of getting into speculation, where getting into some realms that I feel like now, like I need to think about these more even before really talking about them. But the sort of the sort of speculation that like if harm, if suffering is caused by the the illusion of selfhood, that it's somehow, in a way, it's like doing fucked up shit is incompatible with the absence of suffering or something like that. But I can notice in that statement how it's a little bit inconsistent with a lot of what I've been saying, because it already depends on a lot of dualistic concepts. It's as almost as if I want to say that, like, any benefit that approaches ultimate or something like that can't really like come about through the like self-interest. You know what I mean? But it's weird and paradoxical to talk about, because it's like it's kind of as if my whole premise right now is like to make a moral injunction upon you of giving a takeaway or something that we can apply to morality, or something that I would feel good about and you would feel good about. And that's kind of like, that is just kind of like a contradiction of this whole message or non-message or whatever the hell. You know what I mean? So I'm just like a little stumped here about like what to say about ethics. Like kind of having the feeling that I don't have any advice to give you. Which I really don't. I really don't have any advice. But I mean, like, not being an asshole. You know, that's pretty hard to argue with. But, you know, I think that's a given. I think that's obvious. I mean, and if, of course, like that all, you know, relies upon a bunch of dualistic premises. And so it's you know, it's of course like an incomplete kind of compromise things, but that's, you know, that's of course, so is everything. I should probably keep walking to the actual scenic spot, but then I'm kind of thirsty. That means the farther I'll have to walk back. Well, also the battery's getting low for some reason. I think the external battery is maybe not totally charged. So maybe we just go. We got 3% left. I mean, this is like where I face this dilemma of, so the 4-hour commitment is actually really important here, in that it's kind of a framework in which everything that arises in this 4 hours like has to be taken into consideration. You know, that like, and so it's like with a longer duration of time, it's more difficult to like uphold some particular framework or perspective that is like more relative or more limited or something. And so like when you have this continuous experience of 4 hours, it's like you're kind of like stretching if you're kind of like stretching the limitations of your own physiology, your like emotional resilience, your cognitive abilities by this duration. I think it's really important, because then like all the other, it provides this space in which like blind spots have to kind of be revealed, and you have to deal with them. Like that I have to keep talking, you know, the fact that I have to keep talking, and that it is going to be revealed on YouTube to like a bit large public, like means that I kind of have to deal with whatever emotions, whatever okay, our battery is just about dead now. It's pretty much dead, so I'm gonna say bye.